Do an intro and then I'll ask you a question. Ready?
Go.
We're here with Mr. Ames, a prominent business owner in Prince William County, Virginia. And my name is Marion Dobbins. I'm an intern at George Mason University Folk Life Department. It is March 31st, 2014. We are at the home and business of Mr. Ames, and we are videotaping his life experiences for the Northern Virginia Civil Rights Archives, initiated by the Honorable Congressman Gerald Connolly. Mr. Ames, on behalf of the Congressman, I want to thank you for participating in this project. As you know, your video testimony will be stored in the Library of Congress, the archives of George Mason University Folk Life Department, and the library systems of Prince William and Fairfax County. This is done so future scholars, educators, government leaders, and others will understand the struggle and sacrifices made by people such as yourself for equal rights. This project will commemorate the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act. So let's get started, shall we?
Okay.
Let's start by you first giving us your full name and your date of birth.
It's Bernard Oliver Ames, March 2nd, 1928,
And Mr. Ames, where were you born?
in Cheriton, Virginia.
Cheriton, Virginia. Where is that exactly?
Well, to know where it is, you almost got to be from there.
Okay.
Eastern Shore has a peninsula, 2 counties, Northampton and Accomack. I'm from Northampton. And it has 3, when they had the magisterial districts, it had 3 magisterial districts. With been Franktown, Cape Charles, and Townsend.
Okay.
And I'm from Cheriton, Virginia.
Now, were your family, your mother, father, grandparents, were they all from there?
I can't trace anybody from the Eastern Shore except my maternal grandfather, and he was from the area of Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay. So how did your parents get to where they were, to that area?
I can't trace them away from there.
Okay. So what did your father do for a living?
My father was a farmer.
What kind of produce did he grow?
We grew white potatoes, cabbage, string beans, or green beans you call them, lima beans, tomatoes was a big crop, lettuce, cabbage, did I say cabbage?
Mm-hmm.
Beets, all vegetables, and shipped them all to New York, Philadelphia by truck and by railroad at one time.
So did he own his own land?
No.
So he worked someone else's land?
My father had, my father's father had owned a farm and they lost it in the Depression. So my daddy was renting.
What was it like growing up in your community?
Well, my community, first thing, I lived 7/10 miles that I lived in most of my years. From 2 to 3 years old was 7/10 of a mile from the county road. So growing up right at the home, I didn't have too many people to play with, just one sister. And this was not in Cheriton. This, we could take Cheriton address, but this was about 3 miles from the town of Cheriton. Of course, later on we moved to the town of Cheriton. And of course that was a community, right, many people.
So in that community, was it segregated?
Oh yeah, we always had segregation. We had segregation until, what was it, the 50s, the 60s?
Mm-hmm. So what was segregation like in your community?
Segregation in our community was that we got along, but everybody just stayed. I mean, you didn't see a black person and then they wanted to call you colored. They hadn't learned that you could say black. You wouldn't have seen a black person going to a white church when I was growing up. You wouldn't have seen a black person going to a white restaurant. There were a few of them. I don't remember too many restaurants at home that you go to no window and stuff like I've seen some other places. But there were some places that you would go, like a drugstore, and simply stand and be waited on for medicines or whatever you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Were the hospitals segregated?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And the funeral homes?
I guess, I don't know whether to say the funeral homes were segregated or not, but at home, I guess they were. At home, I just never heard growing up of one of the white film directors burying a black.
Okay.
And I never heard of one of the black funeral homes burying a white. The only experience, and I wasn't at the funeral home at that time, it was owned by my uncle, and I had left. So what I'm saying now is hearsay. His son, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, got to be a lieutenant colonel in the Army, told me that there was a time when there were Mexicans, or I guess Mexicans, or foreign workers that worked on the farms, groups that came through. They did this every year, and that they had several deaths, and that some of them white, some of them black, and that on some occasion his father got one that they thought was white, and because it was a hurry to get rid of it, and then one of the white film directors that they were friendly with got one that was black, and he was hurried to get rid of it. So really and truly, when I grew up, it was just unheard of that one of the black funeral homes having a white service, or vice versa. Now in this area, they did, of course.
Okay. Well, what was school like when you were growing up?
Segregated. My high school, there was one high school, Northampton County High School, there was well, I started the school, I began school at what was called Tidewater Institute. Tidewater Institute was, I guess you would say, a private school that had elementary and high school. And I suppose that it was taken care of by donations and contributions and all of that. So my first 2 years in school, my first year and a half in school, I went to Tidewater Institute, the grammar school, and the lady named Miss Carly Johnson. Now, when it was time for me to go to the 3rd grade, that school they discontinued it. So I went to Cheriton School, which was Cheriton Elementary School, which was 2.5, 3 miles from the farm, and I had to walk. And then my high school was located in Massaponga, Virginia. Massaponga this was for the whole Northampton County of blacks. And I'm guessing, I should know, it was about 12 or 13 miles from my home. So I rode the bus. It might have been over 12, I just never measured it, I should have. I rode the bus to high school for the entire 4 years. I would walk out from the farm and out from Cheriton. Once we moved to Cheriton, and catch the bus. And the bus would take us there. And the bus brought all the children. It was always a bus that was worn out, because we got the buses, they gave us the buses after the whites. When the whites got new buses, we got the old buses.
How were the books and things like that?
We had different books.
Were they the books that were left over from the white schools?
No, I don't think so. We just had different books. I can't really be real truthful about this. The reason that I know that they were different books is my sister, who was 3 years ahead of me, needed to get a book, and we could always get used books. And she got a used book. She purchased a used book from someone that my dad knew, a group of people that ran a store. And they thought it was the right book, but it was altogether a different book.
So the curriculum, you think, for blacks and whites were totally different?
No doubt about it.
In your curriculum, did they ever have anything about black history or?
At my school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we labored on it. We had all black teachers, so it was one of the things, I've forgotten it now, but I knew the black history. I mean, it was almost because of the pride of the people in the school. You almost could not learn it unless you were a moron. I mean, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Dr., what's his name, it won't come to me, that discovered blood plasma.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Drew?
Dr. Drew. You couldn't even, you just couldn't grow up without knowing these people. Benjamin Davis, General Benjamin Davis. You couldn't grow up with the 99th Pursuit Squadron in the war. You just couldn't go to school without hearing this. And who wrote it? Who was it? I can't think the name, but wrote all the dialect. Liza, bless the Lord. Don't you know these days embroidered? You heard all that? You read all that? Who wrote that? I forgot.
Langston Hughes, I think.
Yeah.
Langston.
It was almost impossible to go to school without this because we would get assignments. We would get assignments, and they would have a certain day that people who had learned this would compete pronouncing and pronouncing and talking the way that it was supposed, the way that it was written. I used to wonder about that, but then as I grew up and became grown, I realized that there was value in that. One of the values was if you could do this, that dialect, then it helped you with pronunciation. It really did.
Yeah.
He said, Liza, bless the Lord. See?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Okay.
good stuff.
It's good stuff.
So, when we talked earlier, you had told me that you had been part of the Montford Point Marines.
Yeah.
Can we
Somebody
talk a
else
little
told me
bit
to.
about that? When you joined the Army and what boot camp was like?
Well, no, they're okay. I was one of those people that was eligible for the draft twice. I was eligible for the last draft that they had for World War II, and this was in 1946. Actually, that draft, though the draft was 46, when they went back and declared the date of the war, it became after the war because the war ended in some date in 45, the official date. Anyway, I went for draft and I was turned down for the Army. I went in March or April of 1946.